What is the strangest thing that happened to you that you can't logically explain? I'm too young to remember this, actually. But my mom always tells this story. Apparently, when I was younger, like barely able to speak, I was sitting on the floor playing with some toys nonchalantly with my mom when I just said when I was in heaven, I met a woman who said you'd be the perfect mommy for me. I apparently held the belief that I was in heaven before being born, and an angel looked at me and chose the mom I went to. My mom asked me to describe the woman, and I apparently described my mom's great-grandmother perfectly. Down to the eye color. I had never met my great-great-grandmother, nor seen a picture of her. In 1996, I had just dropped out of university and was moving home to my parents' place. My tail was firmly between my legs, I had almost no money and no job prospects. Basically, I was screwed. I had an old Jeep Comanche with all my belongings in the back and 200 miles to go. I borrowed $20 from a friend for gas and started the trip. I got to a point that was 30 miles from home and was on empty. I pulled into a gas station/rest stop and sort of cried for a minute in my truck. I needed $5 for gas to make it the rest of the way and had nothing. There was no way I could call my dad and ask for help, he was already so disappointed. After a minute I started searching around my truck for change, anything. I opened the glove box and there were these paper loyalty bucks for a gas station that I never used. It turns out it was the exact gas station that I was stopped at. $4.70 worth of bucks. I found another $2 in change, put $6 in the gas tank and bought a Coke. I made it home. Fast forward 20 years, I had sorted my crap out and am a lawyer. That gas station hired me as their outside counsel. I got to tell this story to the president of the company. Once, my mom and I were driving to Las Vegas from Santa Clarita. We were just passing Barstow and on the I-15. It was right about high noon and very hot. Not a cloud in the sky. She had a fancy Lexus at the time with a touchscreen console on the dash that could play DVDs while driving. I remember we were on a long stretch of road with a lot of space between cars on the highway. One minute we see nothing ahead of us and then all of a sudden, a woman was walking across the highway right in front of our vehicle. My mom swerved behind her and barely missed her. She pulled off to the shoulder and we look behind us, and we see her go all the way across the highway, including westbound traffic. Then she turned around, and walked all the way across again. Each time, nearly getting clipped by an unsuspecting and oncoming car like ourselves. At one point, a semi-truck almost hit her head on, missing her by literally one step. Each step she took was a steady and confident step, looking ahead of her and never batting an eye to any oncoming traffic. She was barefoot, mind you, and walking on the boiling asphalt with zero sense of urgency. So my mom calls 911, we're directed to Highway Patrol. They say they've received numerous reports and they're headed out to it. My mom decided after hanging up to slowly reverse down the shoulder to get a better look and see if she's okay. Yes, I know, stupid in more than one way. As we get to a spot behind her now, she's crossed the highway and is now in front of our vehicle. This part I will never forget. The woman slowly turns her head and looks at us and is now slowly but steadily walking towards our car. She was white as day in every way. White nightgown, pale, dry, wrinkled skin, white hair, and the palest bluish-gray eyes I've ever seen, and barefoot. Almost looked like a Walking Dead version of Rose Dawson from Titanic. I was in the passenger seat, which was on the shoulder. When my mom made eye contact, she froze. Absolutely shut down. I remember the woman walking so close to my door, I could see her eyes make contact with mine. It looked as if she was blind and lifeless but could not just see me, but see into and through me, like into my soul. I went cold immediately. She reached for my door handle and I remember screaming at my mom to punch the gas, and without hesitation, she came to quick and we peeled out of there. In the back window, I saw her watch us speed off and then continue to cross the road again. A mile down the highway, we called Highway Patrol to see what happened, and they didn't have a clue what we were talking about and said they got no reports of a woman crossing the highway. My mom to this day still doesn't remember the time between when we reversed to when we dipped out. I have no idea what happened that day except for what I witnessed and experienced. As a child visiting my grandma's house, my mom's mom, whenever I left the house I'd wave next door to Ken, who was always sat in the bay window looking out at the sea. They lived right on the coast off the North Sea in Hartlepool, UK. We'd never really talk, but just a little wave before I went to get into the car. One time I'm leaving my grand's house, I'm in front of my mum who stopped at the door to talk to my gran. So I head down the steps and towards the gate. I turn back and see Ken in the window. Big smile as usual, waving at me. I give him a wave back. He stands up, gives me the thumbs up, and wanders towards the back of the room. My mum comes walking down the steps and asks, "Who are you waving at?" I replied, "Ken." To this day, I can remember my mom's face. She just went white, but didn't say anything to me. It was only a few weeks later when she plucked up the courage to tell me that Ken had died a few days prior to our visit to my grans. I don't believe in ghosts, but I know I saw him. I can still picture his striped gray sweater with light stripes across it. Him waving and getting up out of his chair. There was no one else in the house, he lived by himself. Brains are weird. Update 1. I had an update from my mom regarding me seeing Ken. I reminded her of the incident, and what she can remember of it. I got this reply. "I'm sure you saw him too, I know there's someone in our house. Ashley, Mum's cat, sees them on the stairs the same time every night if we are in the lounge. I always say hello. Definitely doesn't feel like a threatening presence though. So now it turns out there's not just Ken next door, there's someone in my mam's house. Maybe it's my gran. Once COVID is over, I'll have to stay over a few nights to see for myself." About 5 years ago, I was out with 2 friends. At the time, this group of friends liked to party hard, as did I. We were a few years out of college living in a resort town. That night, we went out to dinner and then went to a bar. We all did a round of shots when we got to the bar. Immediately after the shot, I felt like I needed to throw up. It was odd because I had not drank much at dinner and I was very accustomed to taking shots. This was a very bizarre reaction for me. I had been driven there by one of the friends, but I immediately decided I needed to leave, so I got a cab, went home, and felt completely fine when I got home. I would usually have been out until 4/5 am, but I was home by 11 p.m. I watched TV and went to bed, but the whole night, I had a weird feeling. I woke up the next morning and the 2 girls I was with had been in a car accident. The person driving was drunk and texting, and she hit a huge telephone pole. The pole fell onto the car, almost splitting the car in half. By the grace of God, the universe, something. Neither of them were harmed, but if someone was sitting in the back seat, they would have potentially been dead. I am 100% certain I would have gotten into that car and likely would have been sitting in that seat. I don't fuck with drinking and driving or anyone who attempts to drink and drive anymore. I will never forget witnessing this moment. In my physics gen ed last year, we were split up in groups and working on a lab. A guy at another table let out a yell while extending his arms, and fell headfirst off his chair. The very second in between his yell and hitting the floor, a beeping started going off in the room, followed by the words, "An emergency is happening in your building. Please evacuate at the nearest exit," and accompanied by flashing lights. The guy is having a seizure on the floor, so all we're focusing on is getting him help. A campus police officer comes in and tells us the rest of the science buildings have already evacuated for the fire alarm. Most of us leave to give some space to the people helping the guy. While outside, we're talking amongst ourselves, absolutely baffled by the coinciding events we just witnessed. Did the flashing of the alarm trigger epilepsy? No, because he was already on the floor by the time the lights kicked in. Was there some kind of sensor on him that alerted when his body was experiencing an emergency? No, because it was his first seizure. Just reading it might sound lame, but witnessing it and working out what was happening in real time was just eerie. One morning I woke up and noticed my camera was on top of the sofa opposite my bed. I knew I didn't put it there because it was a very expensive camera and it could very easily fall from this place. I had placed it in my cabinet. I went over, picked it up, and turned it on and clicked the button to view photos. There were hundreds of photos of me sleeping, all seemingly taken from the back of the sofa. I was literally so freaked out, I couldn't stop crying. I lived alone. It was just photo after photo of me sleeping. The photos were taken in quick snap, where the camera takes approx 1 photo per second. I later realized the camera didn't even have a quick snap setting, so technically it was impossible for the camera to take the photos at all. The timestamps suggest all photos were taken between 2 and 3 a.m. I've never figured out WTF happened, how the camera got to the sofa, or how it is even possible for a camera with no quick snap to quick snap, but I still have a USB with the photos on it and it still freaks me the fuck out. Weirdly, this thread has actually jogged my memory about something potentially related I had completely forgotten about that was sitting deep down in my memory bank. Approx 12 months before the camera incident, I received a letter in my P.O. box that was typed, not handwritten, and addressed directly to me saying if I did not agree to meet with the sender, they would kill me while I sleep. To be honest, I dead set thought it was a stupid joke because I couldn't think of anybody that would want me to meet with them, and I binned the letter and never told anybody. I got 3 or 4 of those threatening letters demanding that I respond, but no actual way of responding or no hint about who it was from. The sender wrote like I should know who it is, but I did not. One letter did provide a time and place to meet, but of course I did not attend. That was the final letter. I did move house and change my postal address shortly after the camera incident though. I have 3 that really stand out to me, and as far as explainability, I can't explain any of them, but one is the winner as far as scaring the shit out of me. They all involve doors. 1. In my teenage years I lived in a townhome owned by my then stepdad, who freely admitted he thought the place was haunted. He was self-employed as a sound equipment installer and often would come and go during the day, and my mom worked 9 to 5 at a law firm. It was summer break, but I wasn't driving yet. I spent a lot of time outside, and this was before the time everyone had a cell phone, so I'd often take our cordless home phone outside with me. I went outside one day, and realized I'd forgotten the phone. When I tried to go back inside to get it, the door was locked. Not the handle, which I may have written off as something I accidentally did on my way out, the deadbolt. The handle freely turned, but the deadbolt was engaged. The deadbolt that requires a key to lock from the outside, which I did not have. I stood there dumbfounded for a few minutes. Nobody else was home, and the only other entrance to the house was a set of sliding doors in the basement that were always locked. What the fuck just happened? I kept trying to open it like an idiot for a while before finally resigning myself to borrowing the neighbor's phone and calling my stepdad. He was in town, and after asking me if I was sure 1,000 times, came by to unlock the door. I'll never forget him saying yep, the deadbolt was completely thrown. I can't explain that. I spent the rest of the afternoon inside, trying to recreate the situation. I slammed the door shut so many times in an attempt to get the deadbolt to wobble and lock itself. But it never did, and honestly I didn't expect it to. 2. Same townhouse. I was now driving and often stayed late after school as I was in theater and had practices. This afternoon I had about 30 minutes between class and practice, and I drove home to get a snack. When I got there, my mom was at work and my stepdad's van was gone, so I assumed he was gone as well. The door was locked. Now when you walk into this home, right in front of you to the left is the kitchen, the right is my bedroom, and the middle has a staircase going downstairs. I unlocked the door, came inside, and turned into the kitchen with my back to the staircase. As I was making a sandwich, I heard someone downstairs. I turned back around and the staircase door was open, stairwell light was on, and someone was clearly downstairs. At the time I thought, wasn't that door closed when I got here? But I also rationalized, because my stepdad's van was a cargo van and it wasn't uncommon for someone to borrow it to haul things. So I assumed he was home, his van was borrowed, and I went to the top of the stairs. I stood there, looking down the stairs, eating my sandwich, and I almost said something. It was almost out of my mouth, but something stopped me. I still don't know why I didn't yell "Hi Jay" down the stairs. Instead I turned around and left, and I left the door unlocked because he was home, right? When I got back from practice my mom was mad at me because Jay said he came home around 5 p.m. to an unlocked house. He had a lot of expensive equipment in the basement. I was always to lock the door. I tried telling her what I'd seen. He was home at 4. She said he wasn't. I swore he was. Something was home. My brother believed me, but my mom never did. 3. I lived in a shitty trailer in my early 20s when I was poor with 2 young kids. It had 2 bedrooms, which I'd given to the kids, and I slept on the couch in the living room, which was in direct line of sight to the front door. I put the kids to bed around 9 p.m., and I always locked the door. Always. I still to this day clearly remember locking both the handle and deadbolt and checking to make sure it was fully locked before taking a shower. Eventually I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. on high alert. As my eyes cleared and I started thinking sensibly, I realized I was staring into the street. My front door was wide open. Not like, oh, it's a little open or cracked, or I didn't quite close it all the way and a strong wind came along. It was fully open. Like 90-degree angle here. Plus I had a glass storm door that was fully closed and latched, blocking any wind we might have had, which we didn't have anyways. I got up and walked to the door to close it, and that's when I lost my shit. Y'all. The deadbolt was still in the locked position. It was fully turned to lock, sticking out into the living room air for God and everyone to see. You ever have those moments where you swear there's ice in your veins? That was it for me. I've never been scared like that in my life. In a closed door, you can't even turn the deadbolt to fully locked without it being lined up in the door jamb properly. I knew I'd locked that door. And yet here it was, staring me in the face. I didn't sleep without the lights on for a week. I've had sleep paralysis off and on my entire life. Sometimes it was super scary and I'd see shadow figures. One time it was these little black sharp-clawed figures crawling up my bed. Sometimes I wouldn't see anything scary at all, but I'd feel something in the room with me. I always chalked it up to just being my brain wanting to fuck with me. Until this happened. I had gone out bar hopping with friends and ended up back at my best friend's house to crash afterwards. We had fallen asleep watching Netflix on his couch. It was one of those big U-shaped couches and we were sleeping at opposite ends. I woke up, unable to move, sometime around dawn. The light was very dim in the room, but I could both see and feel the blanket slowly being pulled off of me. After the blanket hit the floor, I felt a cold clammy hand grab my wrist and start pulling my arm. I couldn't see anyone touching me, nor could I stop them from pulling my arm. I was terrified and trying to do the finger wiggle to wake myself up. Suddenly, my best friend sits straight up and screams, "Leave her alone." I wake up immediately and am able to move. Grant runs to the light switch and flicks it on. His eyes are wide and he's freaking out, looking around for some kind of weapon to fend off the intruder that has found their way into his apartment. But there's no one there. He tells me that he was half asleep, and when he opened his eyes, a tall, thin, red-headed man, wearing a Chicago Bulls bomber jacket, we lived in Oklahoma so this detail stood out to him, was bent over me, pulling on my arm. This man was so real to him that he checked every room in the apartment, every window and door. It took him half an hour to come to the conclusion that no one was ever actually in the apartment with us. The entire event is terrifying to me because we both felt and saw things that didn't happen, and those things matched, just in different ways. So, now, every time I have sleep paralysis, which, BTW, no longer happens as long as I'm sleeping with my I wonder, is some of this really happening? So one night I'm driving home from a friend's place. It's pretty late, like 2 or 3 in the morning. I live in the suburbs and the streets are relatively tight, so I am typically driving pretty slow. Don't speed in your neighborhood. Happy neighbors are good neighbors. I'm nearing the turn to enter my close, and from a distance I see what looks to be someone outside. Pretty unusual this time of night, as it's all young families and retirees around me. As I get closer, it's definitely a kid, which is even stranger. Like, doesn't this kid have parents? They're standing directly under the street light with a raincoat on, not raining, and their hood up over their head so that the shadow cast completely covers their face. I know my neighborhood pretty well, and while I don't know most by name, you know who has kids and who doesn't. This corner house 100% doesn't have any kids. That kid's gaze was locked onto my truck, unwavering, turning their head and staring straight at me as I slowly pass, turning right towards my house, this kid only a few feet away. This kid did a full 180 with their body and watched me drive down my street. While I only live 6 or so houses into the close, it's just enough I lost sight of the kid. It was super unsettling. I couldn't even quite explain to you the feeling I got from it. I back into my driveway, put my truck in park, think about what I saw, and say, F it, I've got to check this out. Back into drive and back down the street, maybe 20 seconds, tops, since I passed and kid's gone. Vanished. The roads are straight enough in any given direction that in that short amount of time that kid would have had to straight up sprint to stand a chance of being out of sight. Fucking demon child is gone. I went home, parked quick, and didn't take my time getting inside and locking the door. To this day never saw the kid again or anything that's given me a bad vibe like that. Damned if I know what was going on. If it was a prank, hats off, you did it, kid. When I was younger, we lived in a 110-year-old Victorian house. Everyone would notice weird things. I was home alone organizing the silverware when I dropped a fork onto the table only to have it bounce once and fly at the wall like someone slapped it. I still have no idea how you can drop something straight down and have it launch horizontal for 5 feet. My parents, when they first bought the house, turned off all the lights, 5 floors if you count basement and attic. My mom did the top 2, father did the bottom. The met in the middle, went to the first floor, left, got to the car and noticed not only was the 3rd floor light on but the blinds were now up. We had a seesaw. My mother turned on the light and saw it violently going up and down. I was in the basement and felt a hand brush down my back. I jumped and turned and saw no one there. I convinced myself it was just my shirt moving weird. As I went up the steps I heard giggling. When I was older I was sitting on the couch and heard my dad say what the foo watch out right before a framed puzzle we had fell on me. My dad said he saw it lift itself off the hook. We had a Mastiff, a Rottweiler, and a German Shepherd. They refused to go to the attic. Our entrance had 2 sets of doors. The front doors, then a small room, then the second set of doors. We never locked those doors as it was 2 large bolts that went into the floor and then a third bolt that held the 2 doors together. Locking it was very hard with a key, so you could only do it from the inside with considerable force. We came home one day and the door was locked with all 3 bolts. In other words, our completely sealed house was locked from the inside. My mother flipped, grabbed us, and ran to a payphone to call the police, because if that door is locked then there is someone in the house unless the left via a second or third story window. 3 cop cars came, they unlocked the door with my mother's key and swept every last inch of the place down to one of them going into our crawl space. Nothing. Not only that, my mother's gold necklace was laying on the table and all the windows were locked. We had a family friend who is a cop and one of my uncles who is a cop come spend the night. Next morning everyone's is up and my uncle goes to leave only to see that the door is again locked from the inside. We removed those locks that same day. Mastiff was laying next to me while I was watching TV. Suddenly he jumps up and backs into me. He's growling and snarling while staring up the steps. The other 2 dogs run in and immediately have their ears go back and their mohawks go up. This went on for several minutes. Our German Shepherd started inching toward the step and did a little lunge, nipping at the air, baring his teeth. About 5 seconds later I heard what sounded like someone full sprinting up the steps of the first floor from the landing to the second floor steps, then the third. I called my mom from the house phone. While on the phone I heard what I can only describe as a wail from the 3rd floor. Years later, parents are divorced, I'm with my dad for the weekend. I helped him clean the 3rd floor. We put the toys in a large toy chest from the closet they were in. While we are brushing our teeth I go pale. I'm hearing something, so I shut off the water and ask my dad to listen. We both are completely quiet. The sound starts again. It's the sound of clink clink but a bit of rhythm to it. I couldn't place it at first, then said, "Dad, I think that's the xylophone." We go up and the toy chest is open and the xylophone is on the floor. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.